Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents He Calls Me by Lightning, The Life of Caliph Washington, and the Forgotten Saga of Jim Crow, Southern Justice, and the Death Penalty. By S. Jonathan Bass. Narrated by Mirron Willis. Preface. For hardship does not spring from the soil, nor does trouble sprout from the ground. Job, chapter 5, verse 6. She was already lying in a coffin in the Bessemer Public Library the first time I saw Hazel Ferris. I was on an elementary school field trip to see Bessemer, Alabama's most celebrated citizen, a leathery corpse known as Hazel the Mummy. When we arrived at the city's library, located in the majestic old post office building on 19th Street, our hosts ushered us down the stairs to the basement and a makeshift hall of history where Hazel was lying in state. Never before had I seen a dead body, much less one that passed on over 70 years earlier. As I gazed upon this grotesque artifact, faded ruddy hair, hollow eye sockets, sunken cheekbones, and broken and missing teeth, my thoughts were a mixture of horror and fascination. Her skin looked like an overcooked Idaho potato, and every joint, rib, and bone was visible underneath. Decades later, when I came across an old promotional poster for Ms. Ferris, her image came rushing back, as did the lore surrounding her death. According to the story, she was a pint-sized, red-headed woman in Louisville, Kentucky, who possessed a fierce temper, drank whiskey straight from the bottle, and fought with her husband. At breakfast on the morning of August 16, 1905, she announced her intention to buy a new hat. When her husband objected to this latest spending spree, she pulled a 6-gun and shot him dead. As she stood over her spouse's lifeless corpse and inspected the deed she had done, 3 city policemen rushed through the door. Ferris turned and fired 3 more shots, killing each officer. Within minutes, a county sheriff's deputy arrived and slipped into the house. He saw the bodies littered across the floor, and as he tried to sneak up behind Hazel, she turned suddenly, and the pair tussled over the deputy's gun. His gun discharged, and a wayward bullet tore off Hazel's ring finger. She soon broke free from his grip, grabbed her pistol from the floor, and ended his life with a single shot. Hazel Ferris fled Kentucky and took refuge among the thieves, murderers, and whores living at the turn of the century in the wild young town of Bessemer, Alabama. She found work in a bordello in the red light district and a new love, a police officer. It was short-lived, however. When she entrusted her cop-killing stories to her policeman, he opted for the $500 bounty on her head as opposed to her love. Rather than face the hangman's noose, Ferris ended her life with a heady mixture of arsenic and whiskey on December 20th, 1906. Her corpse was taken to a local furniture store where it mummified and was later sold to a carnival show barker. For over 100 years, Bessemer residents recounted this sordid tale of Hazel Ferris. Few locals, however, asked why a prostitute who murdered 5 men and took her own life was the city's most revered and celebrated citizen. The answer was undeniably obvious, even if it was lost upon the city's white residents. Hazel the Mummy was an all-too-fitting symbol of Bessemer, a small industrial town divided by race, labor, and ideology, where an incendiary brew of vice, violence, and corruption thrived. This was a city that counted among its population communists, vigilantes, black revolutionaries, union thugs, pathological racists, scabs, mobsters, and criminals, all of whom used violence as a necessity to gain or maintain power. And this was a place where crooked politicians and lawless policemen lined their pockets with money and sin, where vice was plentiful and virtue was lacking, where murder and mayhem were essential elements of the culture, and where poor itinerant individuals like Hazel Ferris looked to escape life's sorrows in a city of strangers. During the already fractious summer of 1957, 50 years after Hazel's death, another downhearted resident searched for a way out of Bessemer. His name, unknown to history, was Caliph Washington. Just 17, he was the prime suspect in the shooting death of a policeman, James B. Cowboy Clark. The racial element to the apparent murder, Washington was black, Clark was white, fueled the sweltering fury of Bessemer's all-white police force. Most of the city's population was black, and race only intensified an already omnipresent feeling of danger as the lawmen hunted mercilessly for young Washington. Alone and abandoned, he hid in the woods and prayed for escape. I first heard of Caliph Washington's story from David Murphy, who brought a copy of an old handbill to my office at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama, and smacked it on top of my desk. "You've got to read this," he proclaimed. Murphy, then an undergraduate, was working on his research project for my civil rights history class. In a packet of materials he received from a faraway archive of the Roman Catholic Josephites was a leaflet entitled "Wrongly Condemned Man Held Without Trial." The man was Caliph Washington. As I soon appreciated, it was indeed a great untold story, but there were, of course, plenty of forgotten tales from the civil rights era that needed telling. I slipped the article into a future projects folder and hoped perhaps that I would look at it again someday. Someday, however, came sooner than I expected. One morning, as I visited with Reverend Wilson Fallen, a Baptist pastor, historian, and Bessemer native, I asked if he had known Caliph Washington. In his rich, sonorous voice, he answered, "Oh, yes," and proceeded to give me a soul-stirring sermon on Caliph Washington. The minister had known him well and encouraged me to dig a little deeper into his tragic experiences. A few days later, Dr. Fallen spoke at St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Church in Bessemer, and afterward a small woman walked up to him and said, "You probably don't remember me, but my husband's name was Caliph." Wilson responded, "Of course I remember you, and I know someone that you need to talk to." The next day, I received a message to call Mrs. Washington. When I spoke with Christine Washington on the phone, she explained that she prayed for many years for someone to come along and tell Caliph Washington's tale. She paused for a second and added, "I think that someone is you." And I was taken. As I began to sort out Washington's torturous life, I discovered that his story was inseparable from Bessemer, the dark city of Hazel, the mummy. Yet I knew that average citizens, both black and white, helped the city maintain a fragile varnish of respectability. These peaceful, law-abiding residents worked hard, attended church, and lived quiet lives. Many were unaware of Bessemer's shadowy side. "I never knew," my Pollyannish mother once told me, "that things were that bad." I felt like I was in a slightly privileged position because my parents grew up in Bessemer. During the Great Depression, my grandparents and great-grandparents joined the migration of penniless farmers looking for a better life and a steady job in the city. My paternal grandfather, Samuel J. Bass, left his father-in-law's farm in the West Alabama community of Speed's Mill in Pickens County and found work in the Muscoda iron ore mines on the outskirts of Bessemer. For almost 20 years, he toiled as a miner and safety officer, providing a hard-earned living for his wife, Lillian, and their 3 boys. My dad, Sam Jr., was the restless eldest son who escaped Bessemer at 16 to join the Merchant Marines in 1943. When my grandfather took him to the Alabama Great Southern Depot, he bade him goodbye and said, "You are on your own. There's nothing more I can do to help you." He turned and walked away as his son stood alone on the train platform. My dad and his brothers were products of the corrupting influences of Bessemer, which left all of them battling personal demons for the rest of their lives. My mother's family had a similar background. My mother, Clara Fay, was raised by her grandparents, Collie and Ida Mae Lindsay Burroughs, who left their family's land in Buell, west of Tuscaloosa, so that Collie could work as a wrought iron fabricator at Ingalls Iron Works in Bessemer. He had a third-grade education, and could read a little and sign his name, but Ida Mae never went to school, and made an X mark in place of her signature. When I knew them, they were well into their 80s. Collie spent his days confined to a wheelchair, listening to Southern gospel music on an old radio, and when the song and the spirit moved him, he shook in a physical and spiritual earthquake. I often asked him if he was okay, and he always nodded his head, still riding the after-effects of the band of holy angels who just visited him. His favorite song was Alfred E. Brumley's "I'll Fly Away." Brumley was inspired to write it while he was picking cotton and humming an old prison song, adapting the lyrics to include, "When the shadows of this life have gone, I'll fly away. Like a bird from prison bars has flown, I'll fly away." Brumley's lyrics foreshadowed the life and trials of Caliph Washington. Perhaps only in the dim shadow of death could he find a way home. As a young black man in the South of the 1950s, Washington found that the entire legal system, from local law enforcement to the Alabama Supreme Court, was stacked against him. Researching his hopeless cause, I discovered numerous personal connections with his story. Just like my white grandfather, Caliph Washington's black father moved from rural Pickens County to work as a miner in the Muscota mines, where they both joined the International Union of Mine, Mill, and Smelter Workers. Before joining the police force, Cowboy Clark worked, in fact, at Vandenberg's Gulf Superhighway service station, where my uncle, G.W. Dub Burroughs, was the manager. When I asked Uncle Dub about Clark's death, he remembered that he was killed by a retarded Negro. Dub's wife, my Aunt Dorothy, was working the graveyard shift at Bessemer General Hospital the night the ambulance brought Clark's mortally wounded body to the emergency department. She recalled, "He was already dead when he arrived." And finally, I once worked at a small newspaper in Bessemer where a retired police officer, Lawton Grimes, Jr., served as a photographer. He gained his photo experience by snapping mugshots of prisoners, including Caliph Washington. Lawton spent every workday at lunch regaling us with his exploits on the Bessemer police force and those of his legendary father, Lawton Stud Grimes Sr. Although these personal connections add authenticity to the story, the broad historical significance of Caliph Washington's life and trials serve as an avenue to explore the measures used by white Southern officials, lawmen, lawyers, judges, and juries to enforce Jim Crow justice at the local level, especially through race-based jury exclusion. The broad focus of this book is on the search for racial justice and the equal application of laws in Southern courtrooms, prison systems, and death chambers throughout the civil rights years, 1957 to 1972. Thousands of pages of trial transcripts and other legal documents provide unique insight into the Southern legal environment, from local, state, and federal perspectives. What is missing from the study of Southern legal history during those years is a thorough examination of the workings of local and state-level Jim Crow legal systems. This book is intended to help fill that void. He Calls Me by Lightning then becomes, in many ways, Bessemer's story. Caliph Washington's life has come to symbolize the violence, corruption, and racism that dominated not only in this city, but also in the larger South. Bessemer, in particular, was a worn-out, dirty city whose most famous inhabitants included Hazel the Mummy, Virginia Hill, a Hollywood socialite and girlfriend to mobster Bugsy Siegel, and Joseph N. Gallo, the consigliere, counselor to the mafia bosses in New York's Gambino crime family. But Caliph Washington, a barely literate black man, remains the central character in this forgotten saga of Jim Crow, Southern justice, and the racial implications of the death penalty. As one of Washington's friends once said, each and every one of us should remember that Caliph Washington is not just a name on a piece of paper or the central character in a story we've been told. Caliph Washington is a human being, and every human being deserves honest thought and consideration. Chapter 1. Steal Away. Caliph Washington stared out the window at the Greyhound scenic cruiser as it rolled through bare Mississippi villages like Hickory Flat, Potts Camp, Pumpkin Center, and Myrtle. This undisturbed Sunday morning, July 14th, 1957, found a handful of quiet passengers scattered about the bus. A General Motors creation with an air suspension ride and a sputtering air conditioner. A 17-year-old Army private of average height. Washington had athletic shoulders, a gentle voice, and a sunshine grin that seemed all the brighter against his midnight black skin. Wearing wine-colored pants, a blue shirt, and a fuzzy gray wide-brimmed fedora too small for his head, he sat in the second-to-last row of the bus, near two other black passengers. A crumpled brown paper sack rested at his feet. It contained a change of clothes, a piece of cake, and a pearl-handled revolver that had just ended the life of a white Alabama policeman. Over 48 hours earlier, just after midnight on Friday, July 12th, a shooting incident occurred on an empty red dirt street close to a row of run-down shotgun houses in Bessemer. Situated 13 miles southwest of Birmingham, at the base of the red iron mountain that gave it life, Bessemer was a poisonous city, consumed by vice, violence, and vigilantism, where an impoverished and powerless black majority was oppressively governed by a ruthless and corrupt white establishment. The shooting of policeman James B. Cowboy Clark looked like a homicide, and all evidence pointed to Caliph Washington as the triggerman. Before the shooting, the officer was in high-speed pursuit of a car driven by Washington. That car, left abandoned near the body of the officer, belonged to Washington's father. The few witnesses all agreed that the man fleeing the murder scene looked like Caliph Washington. From the time of the incident on Friday night, Washington eluded law enforcement officials. As police conducted an aggressive search for the armed fugitive, he slipped out of the state and caught the Greyhound leaving Amory, Mississippi, for Memphis. Fear and instinct compelled him to run. The time and the place convinced him to escape. Life's experiences and his family's history whispered for him to steal away. Steal away in the midnight hour, urged the old spiritual. Steal away when you need some power. Steal away when your heart is heavy. Steal away. Washington needed the big wheels of that silver Greyhound to take him 1,000 miles away from Bessemer to the distant hope of freedom. In the Alabama of 1957, Washington's alleged crime was the supreme offense, on the same level of a white woman being raped by a black man, one sheriff's deputy noted. Such crimes, whether committed or not, collided with long-standing regional, state, and local racial codes of honor, shame, mastery, masculinity, and power. As historian Pete Daniel observed, at any point, at any time, in any town, crossroads, house, or field, a short circuit in racial customs could spark violence. The ordeal of Caliph Washington reveals the savage and petty tyranny of law enforcement, criminal jurisprudence, and community vengeance in the Jim Crow South. In what would become a grim, decades-long odyssey, state and local officials ignored the Bill of Rights and denied Washington due process and equal protection. The entire system of white supremacy, as author Stetson Kennedy noted in 1946, is predicated upon prefabricated prejudices against social equality, against which white Southerners have been conditioned to react emotionally instead of rationally. As Caliph Washington left Alabama on that Sunday bus, he could not escape this burden of irrational Southern honor. It was a tangled society, as author Robert Penn Warren once explained, akin to a giant spider web, where even the slightest touch sent vibration ripples to the farthest reaches. It doesn't matter whether or not you meant to brush the web of things, Warren wrote. Your happy foot or your gay wing may have brushed it ever so slightly. But what happens always happens. And there is the spider, bearded, black, and with his great faceted eyes glittering like mirrors in the sun, or like God's eye, and the fangs dripping. Washington's actions sent ripples to the farthest corners of white society in Alabama. At worst, he murdered a police officer. At best, he dared to defend himself against a white man. Both would elicit rage and demand eye for an eye vengeance. Caliph Washington's Alabama tragedy was similar to the Scottsboro Boys case a quarter-century before, in which the Southern justice system also proved impotent. In that case, an all-white jury convicted 9 young black men of raping 2 white women without any evidence that linked them to the alleged crime. Born on November 14, 1939, Caliph was the 6th of 8 children for Doug and Ashley Washington, sharecroppers working a tiny strip of bottomland near rural Aliceville, Alabama. Instituted after the Civil War, sharecropping was a form of modern feudalism, where poor, landless blacks and whites farmed lands owned by other men. At the end of the season, they gave a percentage of their harvest in return. Like many other poor people in Alabama, Doug Washington toiled each day, raising cotton for a tight-fisted Pickens County white landowner. The family lived in a cropper's shack with no electrical power or indoor plumbing, but plenty of rotten boards. The family, as one observer once noted, could study geology through the floor, botany through the walls, and astronomy through the roof. The landowner provided the Washingtons with the necessities for planting a cotton crop, an old mule, a rusty plow, and a sack of seeds. Nothing else. At picking time, each family member, including young children, had to do their share of the back-breaking labor, with little respite even from the day's end or stormy weather. When croppers like Doug Washington settled with the landowner at the end of the season, they often discovered they owed more than they earned. You couldn't argue with them, one cropper recalled. You couldn't ask no questions. A black man dared not challenge a white man's reckoning. They had to stand by and take what they got. Each year, Washington worked harder, earned less, and slipped deeper in debt. It was just like he was in prison, his son Caliph later recalled. So they would always keep you and say, "You're going to have to stay another year or 2 before you can be relieved of this debt." So when the year would come up, you would never come up with what they wanted. For the Washingtons and other blacks in Pickens County, conflict with the white landowners was constant. If you didn't do exactly what they wanted you to do, Caliph said, regardless of what your parents told you to do, then they would come out and riot at night and try and frighten us. Sometimes they would whip some, and sometimes they would kill some. In the 1940s, Doug Washington quit farming and joined the exodus of rural folks looking for economic freedom in Birmingham's industrial district. He found a permanent job as an iron ore miner at U.S. Steel's Muscoda mines in Bessemer. Muscoda was a slope mine that took advantage of the large outcrop of iron ore on Red Mountain by boring into the seam horizontally at a downward angle. The ore mines sorta grows on the men, one worker believed. Down in the mines, Doug found reprieve from some of the above-ground racial tensions. Weren't no black nor white in the mines, just miners, one of Doug's fellow black workers later recalled. There was no friction at all. Both races rode the skip down into the mines together, came back together, and ate together. Everybody brought their own lunch. Biscuits and fried meat rolled up in the newspapers. Still, Bessemer shared many of the same impoverished characteristics of other Alabama Black Belt towns. Blacks made up 61% of the city's population and held the lowest-paying jobs. The median income for all citizens in the city was among the lowest in Alabama, while the unemployment rate was one of the highest. Only 23% of Bessemer's citizens had a high school education, and on average, most residents had attended just beyond the 8th grade. Most of the city's black population lived on unpaved streets in poorly constructed fire trap homes with inadequate plumbing. The 1950 census found 2/3 of the housing in the city substandard, with no indoor toilets. Public housing facilities in the city numbered 0. From Caliph Washington's perspective, however, the move was a vast improvement from the hard living in rural Pickens County. For the first time in his life, he lived in a house with electric lights, a reliable coal-burning furnace, running water, and, unlike most blacks in Bessemer, indoor plumbing. The Washington children now had enough food to eat, a warm place to live, and clothes without patches all over, and shoes without holes and worn soles. The move to Bessemer also gave Caliph Washington hope for a better life. When we got up here, he remembered, I could see all types of opportunities before my eyes, especially in education. In the 1950s, Washington attended the all-black Dunbar High School. Originally named Bessemer Colored High School, the school opened in 1923 in a stately brick building located at 2715 6th Avenue North. 5 years later, local educator Pearl Shelton Blevins suggested renaming the high school for the black poet Paul Laurence Dunbar, whose writings, at times, gently and ironically bespoke the tragedy of black life in America. I know why the caged bird sings, he wrote in sympathy. Ah me, when his wing is bruised, and his bosom sore, when he beats his bars, and he would be free. It is not a carol of joy or glee. In The Haunted Oak, he wrote from the perspective of a tree used to lynch a guiltless man. I feel the rope against my bark, and the weight of him in my grain. I feel in the throe of his final woe the touch of my own last pain. Despite the promise of a high school education, Caliph Washington dropped out of school at 14, and, like his father before him, he worked hard, earned little, and clashed with the white people. His opportunities for a better life soon slipped away. On July 14, 1957, his only hope was to run away from Bessemer and avoid a possible death on the branches of some haunted oak tree. In the early afternoon, the Greyhound bus entered the densely wooded Holly Springs National Forest and crossed Mississippi's muddy Tallahatchie River. Only 3 more stops remained on the schedule: Holly Springs, Byhalia, and Olive Branch. In 2 hours or so, Washington hoped to arrive at the bus terminal in Memphis, a major transfer station located on Union Street near the banks of the Mississippi River, where he would begin the next leg of his journey. For the first time in days, he relaxed just a little, and he chatted with a few fellow Greyhound travelers. Washington's thoughts, however, never drifted far from the death of the white lawman. He knew from personal experience what would await him if he ever returned to Bessemer. It was pretty hard growing up as a colored person in Bessemer, he once said. The white folks made you feel so small. 2 years before, on a late summer evening in 1955, Caliph and his older brother Joseph were at home while the rest of the family attended a church service. The weather that summer seemed downright tropical, as a suffocating heat wave sapped the energy from nearly every living thing. Caliph tried to keep cool by stripping down to his white cotton boxer shorts and matching T-shirt. He dozed fitfully in his bed, trying to get comfortable in ways you never can when it's that hot, while Joseph, or Doogie, as he was called, took a cold shower in the cramped bathroom adjacent to the enclosed back porch. The Washingtons lived at 418 Short 15th Street, at a tiny shack located on the south side of Bessemer in the Thompsontown settlement. The area, one of Bessemer's original land tracts from the 1880s, was once a respectable working-class neighborhood filled with miners and other industrial workers. Located on a level scrap of land near the base of Red Mountain, Thompsontown was once a center of union activities during the Great Depression, but by the 1950s it was a used-up community made up of Bessemer's poorest black residents. The Washingtons resided in one of 16 dilapidated shotgun shacks, all spaced close together, 1 room wide, 1 story high, and 5 rooms deep. Shotgun houses took their name from their simple, narrow design. A shotgun shell fired through the front door would come out the back without touching a wall. But the name was also a reminder that in the South, and especially in towns like Bessemer, Guns were more than just architectural metaphors. They were rooted in everyday life. These shotgun houses were situated on a small
Sample complete. Ready to continue?